Hello, and welcome to the slightly later part two of an introduction to D-class cruisers. Later than planned in terms of delivery, mainly because this is recording free, because every time I've gone through it so far, I've done a typical Alex and had ideas and gone, oh, that'd be something really cool to add in, and that'd be really something cool to add in. So I've then said that out loud, and that kind of makes the recording kind of bad. So I've gone and restarted after doing some research. So I apologize. This is running late because I've been in Super Alex mode this morning, or Uber Alex, or whatever we're going to call the most Alex version of me is. Right then, it's D-class cruisers, and I've been asked why evolution for relevance in steel. Because they're a complicated design in terms of their history. There's also some things which have been added into this particular part 2, because if I put them in part 1, I'd have got far too excited last night while recording part 1, and I would have woken up the whole house. And nowhere is this more true than with slide number 1. The Special Service Squadron of 1923 to 1924. Right. So, this is a really cool bit of history with basically the Royal Navy going around the world going, look, this is what we've left World War II or World War One with. We've got all these cool ships. We have got these really cool battle cruisers, which you won't know where they are in the world, and they will turn up and they will take out your trade. So you'll have to send something really big to track down them. And we've got these really cool light cruisers, these wonderful long-range light cruisers, and they will be the ones really doing the bulk of the work of taking out your trade, because honestly, we don't have enough battle cruisers for the job. But the mere threat of the battle cruisers and the work of the light cruisers, that's going to be the combination which is going to cause you so much trouble. So please, have a look at them. Have a look at our beautiful ships, and we're going to sail around the world, and we're going to show them off, and we're going to look pretty, and you're going to have to take it. Basically, this is the Royal Navy's 1923 to 4 version of the Great White Fleet. It's not something which the Royal Navy doesn't do on a regular basis. In fact, it often does do these things. So I'm not really sure why anyone would be surprised by them turning up, but here it is. And they are good. You know, you have Dany, Dauntless, Delhi, Dragon, Dunedin. Dunedin is, of course, Royal Navy's New Zealand division, which meant that for this particular exercise, she, I think, sails back to the UK and then joins in with it for the whole way round. It's a fun time for her to come round and then goes back again. So they do some real world crossing. What do you know? I think I've run out of water. Ay, caramba. She's really gone round the world, and that's their purpose. They are visiting places in South America, they're visiting places in Africa, they're visiting places in Southeast Asia. These are not just the places they're visiting, these are going to be the places where they're going to be operating, especially, and I said, already in the 1920s, they were out there. But this is going to be the case in the 1930s. And this is the Royal Navy really showing its presence, showing its power, showing its potency in many ways. Because it's saying, hello, we're here, and we're quite big, and we're quite prescient, and you're going to have to pay attention to us. We are still the world number one. We are the most powerful navy in the world. You might want to challenge us, but can you really challenge us? And by the way, the ships going around the world include 5 of them with 12 21-inch torpedoes on them in 4 treble launchers. Yes, they also have 6 6-inch guns each. But, you know, You really do know that your ships you're building might be individually bigger, but that's a lot of torpedoes. And that's a lot of firepower. And, of course, something which you listeners know, but of course their opponents didn't really know. They have a 1-inch armor box around their magazines as well, which makes them even more survivable, because it makes it even less likely that their magazines are going to blow up, which is helpful. It really is. I should really get more used to using the pause button, shouldn't I? That would probably enable me to have those ideas without having to re-record things. But I prefer doing it in one. It looks more natural. So, the highlight in the 1930s. So, Delhi's world cruising days are not just the 1923, 1924. She's doing cruises all the time. She's a flagship, don't you know? By goodness, does she make sure people know it. I could make the joke based on one of my sister's nicknames that Delhi is her flagship because she's good at delegation, but I won't. But it's a good and proud name in Royal Navy history, so you can understand it why, of any of them, she's used as the flagship. Also, let's be honest, any of the others names used as flagship becomes quite confusing. Diomede and Dany, well, for starters, you have to then explain why the Royal Navy has this obsession with Greek mythology. Dauntless is pretty cool. Delhi, I'm not sure about some of the names. We might go through them again, of the ones which weren't built. So, Dauntless, of course, when she's first deployed to the American, North American and West Indies station, she managed to bash herself up in Nova Scotia and then spent 2 years getting rebuilt. And in time in reserve as well, they're checking the rebuilding actually works. And then she goes off to the American and West Indies station again, helpfully, and then to the South American division. Remember that cruise of the Special Service Squadron. Remember where she's visiting, where they visited, and where they now are. Delhi is flagship 1919 in the Baltic, but is, for most of the time that Dauntless is in her refit stage, is also the flagship of the 8th Cruiser Squadron. Going, hello America. I am your HMS Delhi. I am here to make sure you do not forget about the Royal Navy and that you love us. Also, I'm going to be cruising around the Caribbean and occasionally making visits to Panama just to slightly scare you. Just to remind you, we know where your weak points are. Just like you make visits to our weak points. Because we're friends. But we want each other to know that we are the kind of friends who know where each other needs the help. No, it works. It's diplomacy and deterrence. HMS Dispatch, it has another 2-year refit. Her one, though, isn't caused by having a collision with a piece of land. Yeah. After a 2-year refit in 19, joins the 3rd Cruiser Squadron in the Mediterranean, serving with them until 1937. So she has a 2-year refit, and then she has 4 years service in the Mediterranean. She does 4 years hard service in the Mediterranean. You know, this class gets heavily involved in the Spanish Civil War. In fact, let's see. I think I seem to remember reading in here at one point. One of them gets into a firing fight with a nationalist cruiser. Lost it. It's amazing. I will find it in a second, but you know. Hey, caramba. But they do have an interesting time, and they get pictured in this point. Now, I'm just going to have to make sure not to be distracted by the lovely picture of HMS Cossack. Although that is good, isn't it? HMS Cossack. That's a lovely picture of HMS Cossack. 1938. And let's go. We have Repulse Express. Oh, there's a Freedy. Isn't she lovely as well? Next to War Sprite, but War Sprite looks less pretty in that one. This is my Royal Navy in Focus 1930 to 39. It's a very nice book if you want to have a lot of cool pictures. There we go. There's HMS Dispatch. She looks fairly pretty as well there. HMS Durban. I always feel slightly sorry for Durban. She doesn't really have the career she deserves. Well, we'll talk about why that is in a bit. Just checking to see if there's another one in here. Nope. They're good-looking ships. They are good-looking ships. You have HMS Dany is, of course, serving with the Royal Navy's New Zealand Division. And she's replaced by Achilles. HMS Dunedin is replaced by Leander. So that's what they were out there for quite a while. I think Dunedin is replaced in 1935 by Leander. Most importantly, in the 1930s, they do draw up plans, and the plans are for their refit. It's drawn up under Vice Admiral Henderson, and their planned refit is, whereas the C-class cruisers will be getting the 4-inch high-angle guns, so there'll be a completely AA fit. Basically, the plans for the D-class cruisers was to turn them into rather large battle-class destroyers. Well, what would be battle-class destroyers. They were going to have 4 twin 4.5 upper deck mountings, which hadn't been developed yet. They were still being developed. In fact, you can see what becomes the upper deck mountings actually underneath that picture, because there is a Daring class 1949 with 4.5-inch Mark 6 upper deck mountings. That's what was under development, but didn't come into really in service till after World War II, because they had World War II, and you prioritized other things, and 4.5-inch really wasn't sort of developed. It would be in a slightly earlier version than what the Daring's got, but, you know. So, you know, if they'd done the battle option and gone for BD mountings, they might have, between deck mountings, they might have managed to get them done earlier. But as it was, hack, Squadron, it's all a lovely thing. It's all a lovely design of how they're going to do it. And this is one of the reasons why when Delhi does visit in the USA in 1941, they have designs all ready to go. They just take advantage of the US's Mark 37 fire control director and their 5-inch/38 guns and turn her into a very large Fletcher almost. It's what the Royal Navy does. No, I don't want you to go into the war service. I want to carry on talking about the between-war periods. So, I have managed to use up 6 minutes. So, this is HMS Delhi. This side is her during sort of the interwar period. HMS Dispatch, as you can see, which looks kind of pretty. I love these books. They make my life so much easier in so many ways. Ooh. HMS Durban and Diomede on the same side. So you've got Durban here. You've got Diomede here. Now, you will notice that this is not as good a camera as I normally use for the brew ships and the lives. That's because I use my phone for the lives, which has the far better camera. But I found that if I use my webcam, now I've managed to get a download patch and sort it out, with this particular mic, it gets a far better overall quality, although the picture is, as you can see, far narrower and slightly more blurred behind me. So I will still continue to use this for the live because it's better quality, and I can show the books to you far better that way. But, you know, I wanted to talk about these ships. And this is, of course, HMS Dany in the interwar period. You'd have seen her picture already in part 1. That would have been clearer. They were very, very beautiful. In that picture, I always like to point out, while she's still wearing her full Victorian rig, she's got red, white, and blue neutrality markings on B turret, because she's drawn back for the Spanish Civil War, which does cause, again, when I talk about, normally I mention, it's the fact you start off with a war with Germany, then you've got Italy enter the war, and that is why the Far East is denuded of ships. But there's also the fact there's been the Spanish Civil War before that, which has caused ships to have to be called back. So you've had the Spanish Civil War, which has caused the few ships to be called back, but also has caused the few ships to be worn more and get less chance of refit. Because if you hadn't had the Spanish Civil War, you might well have had some D-class cruisers available to go into that refit. I do not think they'd have got the upper deck mountings. I don't think they'd have been ready in time, but they were big enough and suitable enough for the between deck mountings. They would have just probably had to add in some more ship horsepower, which, believe it or not, was on the plans, along with making the engines more efficient. So the D-class, which if there hadn't been the Spanish Civil War, could have been available in World War II, could have been very, very interesting. The Spanish Civil War. Not just bad for the Spanish people, but bad for the Royal Navy. Do these people have no thought for the Royal Navy's upgrade programs? For goodness sake, you have the Spanish have their Civil War. Then you have the Germans declare war. The Italians then pile in. The French, boom, boom, capitulate. And then the Japanese start in a war. Didn't these nations have no respect for the Royal Navy's upgrade strategy? They were going to be upgraded by 1944. War needed to start then. They needed to leave the Royal Navy alone until then. The Royal Navy would have been perfectly fine in 1944. There could have been a lovely war. In 1942 even, they would have been well on their way. Nations just no care at all for the Royal Navy's upgrade strategy. And all those politicians planning a 10-year gap when you're not going to need stuff. You know what's disturbing is that, I know that was all a bit sarcastic, but you still get the stuff coming up today where people say, oh, it's 10 years. It won't happen. Won't happen in the next 10 years. Or, we'll only procure 2 of these ships because on paper, if everything works as it's supposed to, we will never have a scenario where one will be in a major refit and the other one will need to go into a major refit. So we'll always have potentially one available when we have it. This is leaving aside the fact that one available might mean it's been in port and has just come out of the refit and still needs to be worked up, and the crew need to be put back on, and everyone needs to be checked that all the systems that have been added are working, or leaves into account what happens if one of them has an accident, and if 2 SSBNs, that's ballistic missile submarines, can have a collision in the middle of the Atlantic. Admittedly, they're both supposed to be incredibly quiet and possible to find, but the odds of them actually managing to bash into each other is very, very low. You do wonder, nicest way, 2, you probably need 3. This is where the Royal Navy has advantage in the 1930s. It has a lot of cruisers and a lot of these little ships, and they can use them. Trouble is, using them means that even though you have those numbers, and even though you have those abilities, you don't get to upgrade them. And this is what's going to cause the trouble for the D-class. This is why, unlike the C-class, which really do find a role in World War II as AA cruisers, D-class don't really get that defining moment because they are being used. If we click on to the next one, and I'll go through the highlights in a certain point, but broadly speaking, what happens is this. Because they're useful, they're being used. You start a war with what you have available. You fight the war with what you have available. And it takes time for production to kick up, to start replacing losses and actually grow the fleet. In fact, in the Royal Navy terms, it's not till 1942. Now, I know they take a bit of a building holiday on major units, and there are people who always quote me, oh, yes, but the Flower class are churning out. Well, it's very easy to churn out Flower class. It's very easy to churn out Hunt class destroyer escorts. The reason for that is because they are smaller ships and they are being able to be churned out. But once you're dealing with things which are cruiser-sized, even small cruisers like this, the D-class, or destroyer-sized, you have trouble. It takes time. These are very advanced technical pieces of equipment. These are some of the most advanced pieces of equipment are built in this period. They're high-end equipment. So what you start a war is what you're going to be fighting that war with. For the D-class, this means they are everywhere, fighting a war. They are, as I've already mentioned, on the Northern Patrol. But you have, and I'm sure I did mention it, but just in case I didn't in my earlier discussions, you have Dragon and Diomede are on the Northern Patrol in the and Home Fleet. Diomede, basically, after chasing down Idewald, has a long experience on the South American station, but in September, not 1932, I do apologize for that one, in September 1943. So I can remember that, but unfortunately I typed the wrong one. I do apologize for that. It was converted into a training ship, and then doesn't really see much more in the rest of the war, but is critical as a training ship. But notice that point, it's past 1942. If they'd had to have the major refits prior to 1942, they would probably have had their AA conversion. They might not have had the 4.5 inches fitted, they'd have had the 4 inches fitted. But as they could keep going till after 1942, at that point you have new ships coming in. So the old ship becomes less of a priority to convert. Despite being part of Northern Patrol in 1939, Dragon attempts to hunt down the Admiral Graf Spee. The interesting thing is she does a sort of Cumberland. She's supposed to be up there, and her captain goes, I think the Graf Spee will be down that direction, so I'm heading down there. And you have to wonder what would happen if Dragon had come across Graf Spee solo. I have to think that Graf Spee would have won that fight, but again, there are a lot of torpedoes aboard Dragon, and give her half a chance. No. But she might have caused some damage. Let's be honest, 6-inch guns did cause damage to Graf Spee. My aunt. Hopefully that doesn't annoy YouTube when I put this up. Or I'll end up deleting a few seconds, and it'll take even longer to upload. I don't know. Anyway. Delhi was an important member of Force H. She always is. Delhi's always important. Look, she goes and gets the swanky rebuild. Look how good she looks post-rebuild. She looks fine. Poor Dispatch in 1942, in the same year. Dispatch looks like she's just come out of World War I. And Delhi looks, hello, I'm swanky, I'm here, and I'm new. I look good. And Dispatch actually takes part in the Battle of Spartavento. So, in honestly, which one deserves to refit? She's the headquarters for the Mulberry Harbours, and then she fitted out with Bofors, manned by the Queen's Royal Light Artillery, I think it was, or the light infantry artillery or something. They are. It's an amazing job she does there, but of course, she lost all her guns. It's now 1944, 45. You've got other ships available. You're not going to do a Mulberry Harbour again, not in the Far East at least. Anyway, that's a one-stop job. So yeah, she's gone. Eastern Fleet, Durban, Dany, Doubtless. Oh, even Dragon comes out there for a bit. They have all sorts of things. Eastern Fleet, they are very, very critical to the Eastern Fleet. Durban keeps going back, at least until she isn't any longer. I don't know. Now, I want you to take notice of the construction, because 2 ships, Dragon and Durban, are built by Scots. There are 3 by Armstrong Whitworth. And there are 3 built by Vickers, Fairfield, and Palmer's, 1 each. We're going to consider that. But also, while we're here, we're going to consider the names. That they were apparently arranging for the 4 which weren't built. Daedalus, Daring, Desperate, and Dryad. Well, if they built Daring, that would, of course, absolutely no trouble by the time the Daring class in 1949 comes along with destroyers, but possibly would have caused some interesting for the D-class destroyer names prior to World War II. Desperate? HMS Desperate? Seriously, there are so many Greek tragedy D names which could be used before you used the word desperate. So I'm not sure where that comes from. I've seen it in a couple of books and I've seen it on Wikipedia. But I have honestly no idea. They could have been going to use that name, but I have a feeling that's one of the names which would have been changed before launch. If not, Winston Churchill would have probably demanded to come back as First Sea Lord to change the name. Calling a ship Desperate. It probably has a tradition in the Royal Navy. I haven't looked it up, but it's still... Anyway, Dragon and Durban are the 2 I want you to think about. Now, what sticks out? I'm going to go work in reverse here. Now, Durban is designated as a block ship, and she sunk as it. It's basically, again, in the nicest way, you have this ship, it's no longer viable to upgrade her, as it's past the point at which you're desperate, because you've got new ships coming online. You've got Crown Colonies, you've got Didos, you've got all sorts of things. So, my aunt. I do love that that's our phone, our landline ring number. Anyway, so basically, Dragon is in service with the Polish Navy as ORP Dragon, and I noticed that they keep that name for Dragon. That obviously they liked Dragon. Dragon is sufficiently martial for the Polish Navy, and she is used very well by the Polish Navy. They get her in January 1943, and she is basically wandering around the home fleet area and doing some convoy duties and some sort of things until she takes part in the Normandy campaign as part of Force B. She's irreparably damaged by either Marder or Neger, Neger, small battle units. She's declared a total loss then on the 11th of July and scuttled as part of the invasion harbour defences. So the 2 Scotch ships are reunited again as harbour defences for the Mulberry Harbours. Durban was supposed to be, Dragon... not. Perhaps Dragon was upset to see her sister there alone and felt she should go join her. I'm not sure. But these ships are very survivable, so it's, but they were hit quite hard. In which case, she's then replaced by Dany, and there's all sorts of names put forward for her. Originally, they are picking cities which are technically claimed by the Soviet Union. And that doesn't work. So she's not just randomly named Conrad. She's named after the Polish writer Joseph Conrad, or Joseph Conrad Kowalski, or Joseph Conrad, as he's known in the UK. So that's where ORP Conrad comes from. It's not just a random Conrad. Now, the point I haven't got to is the other. Well, Dragon we can sort of consider not a war loss, not sunk in war, because despite Conrad being crewed by the survivors of Dragon, vast majority of her crew survived. Durban is a different scenario. Durban has quite a successful war. She takes a tanker, she takes several fishy French ships, and the tanker Langfronten, which has Enigma cipher machine, she captures intact. And she takes Hanover, which is a German ship, which is converted into HMS Audacity, an escort carrier. So the first escort carrier. So she's really been a major contribution to World War II and the Royal Navy's operation in it. But she gets sunk by U-124 with 2 torpedoes on the 24th of November. And it's a roughly 1 in 8 survival chance. 67 out of a crew of 486 survived. 67. But it's 1941. Really, so many ships are lost before the end of 1942. It's the big part for the Royal Navy where they lose ships. And time and time again, when I'm looking at classes, if you make it through 1942, your chances of surviving the war go way up. Next slide. So there ends. Well, we know what happens to Dragon, Durban, and Durban. Dany, Dauntless, Delhi are all sort of, and Diomede, Dispatch all go. It's always interesting to me that Dany and Delhi managed to survive on until 1948 because they're being used for other things mainly. But the rest are all gone by 1946. So basically 3 are gone within the war ending in a year. They worked hard. They were good ships for the Royal Navy. They were very good value for money. They were very good for the global reach and global presence missions, which the Royal Navy wouldn't have called them at that time, but they would have called it probably Imperial Policing and Presence Missions. Well, they were excellent for that. Again, the books used for this. You'll see me mostly reading from Cruisers of World War II. That's because the section in the British Cruisers of 2 World Wars and Afters by Norman Freeman is good, but I didn't feel like reading from it today. And Warship Camouflage. The others are all quite good, but one I have to say again, I've used least is the biggest one there, Jane's Fighting Ships World War II. Alright. Naval History Live. What have we got coming up? We've got back pocket cruisers. Well, seem to be the only cruiser one I'm doing in July. This is rather strange for me. I do seem to like to orientate around cruisers, but they're the tribal battle and daring class story, so that's going to be fun. Patreon video and naval diplomacy. Ooh, well, that's going to be a lot of cruisers, isn't it? Naval diplomacy is going to be all about the cruisers. That will probably mention the D class, C class, and Town class in that one. Not that I'm foreshadowing at all. Oh, pre-tribals. No cruisers really in that thing. Oh, well, Indian Ocean operations from 1941 to 43. That's going to get the D class in again. That is. From the Sea is mainly looking at stuff post World War II. And where else can you find me? Twitter, AC_Naval History. Naval History Live on Patreon, AC Naval History. And Global Maritime History. There seems to be a theme running along here. Global Maritime History has as I think I mentioned in the previous one already, has a very good, I'm always quite enjoying my paper on HMS Dorsetshire and her trips around the world. But Exeter's also got a good one, and there are so many interesting papers. Seriously, the project which Sam McLean is doing on ADM8 is really something worth reading if you're interested in the wooden wall navy, I know. Hope you enjoyed this. I'm going to say thank you to everyone for listening to part 2 of the introduction. Thank you to my subscribers. Thank you to my patrons. Thank you to those people who've pre-ordered my book. Thank you to everyone who watches. Thank you to the commenters. And just thank you. Now I'm going to load this up, and hopefully it'll be up by probably 2 o'clock. Maybe 1 o'clock, but probably 2 o'clock. Sorry it's late.